where we talk about the paranormal, UFOs, non-human intelligence. I avoid all those other words because we're not into the threat narrative on this channel. And today, I have an old friend, and I mean he's an old friend. He first reached out to me when he was 16, I believe.
Scientists just decoded ancient Sumerian tablets using artificial intelligence. What they found inside has stunned researchers worldwide, because buried in that 4,000-year-old clay was not a myth, not a prayer, and not a creation story. It was a warning.
What I find very interesting, Steve, is that, some of the latest UFO specials that are out there today, new one by James Fox and a few of the others, there's an interesting new twist around disclosure.
A detailed, structured, deliberate warning about humanity itself. And the most disturbing part is not what it says about the past. It is what it says right now. About you. About why the world looks exactly the way it does. Somewhere beneath the dry soil of what is now southern Iraq, thousands of small clay tablets have been sitting in the ground for over 4,000 years. Most of them were never meant to be found. And for a long time, even after they were dug up, they were never fully understood. The story of how those tablets finally gave up their secrets is not the kind of story that gets told very often. It does not involve a dramatic excavation or a single remarkable discovery. It involves something far more modern, a type of artificial intelligence that was trained to read one of the oldest writing systems ever created. And what it eventually found, buried inside texts that historians had been studying for over a century, was something that nobody in the field had expected to see. To understand why that matters, you need to go back to where this all begins. The region known as ancient Mesopotamia, sitting between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is today Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey, is widely regarded by historians as one of the earliest cradles of human civilization. The Sumerians, who lived in the southern part of this region from roughly 4,500 BCE onwards, were among the first people on Earth to develop a system of writing. That system is called cuneiform, and it is recognized by historians and linguists as the oldest known writing system in the world. Cuneiform works by pressing a reed stylus into soft clay at different angles, leaving behind wedge-shaped marks. Those marks, when combined in different sequences, represent words, sounds, and ideas. It sounds straightforward enough, but in practice it is anything but. The symbols themselves are not fixed. A single sign can mean completely different things depending on its position, the surrounding context, and the time period in which it was written. On top of that, the Sumerian language itself is considered a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. There is no family of related languages that scholars can use as a reference point, unlike Latin, which shares roots with French, Spanish, and Italian, making translation more intuitive. Sumerian stands entirely alone. This created enormous problems for the archaeologists and linguists who began uncovering tablets in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Sites like Nippur, Eridu, and Ur yielded thousands of clay tablets, many of them broken into pieces, some barely larger than a human hand. Museums across Europe and the United States filled their storage rooms with these fragments. Some were catalogued, some were partially translated, and many were simply labeled, shelved, and left untouched for decades. Scholars who dedicated their careers to cuneiform translation made real progress. By the mid-20th century, a reasonable body of Sumerian literature had been pieced together, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, various hymns to Sumerian deities, and what appeared to be creation narratives involving figures the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. These were interpreted widely as mythological stories, religious texts that explained the world through gods, heroes, and symbolic events in much the same way as Greek mythology or the Norse sagas. But there was always a problem. No individual scholar, or even a large team of scholars, could hold the entire body of cuneiform text in their head at once. The sheer volume of material was too large. Tablets found in Nippur might contain passages that directly mirrored fragments found hundreds of miles away in Ur, but making that connection required comparing thousands of documents simultaneously, tracking subtle variations in phrasing, and identifying patterns across broken, incomplete text. Human beings, however brilliant, are not built to do that kind of work at scale. That limitation began to change in 2023 and 2024 when several research teams started applying machine learning models specifically trained on cuneiform inscriptions to the problem of translation. These were not basic translation programs of the kind you might use to convert a sentence from English to French. They were sophisticated models capable of identifying partial symbols, predicting missing text based on grammatical and contextual patterns, and cross-referencing multiple dialects of ancient Mesopotamian writing simultaneously, including Old Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian. By 2025, these tools had been made available to research teams working with tablet collections held in major museums and universities. The results, according to several scholars who have written about the project, were striking from the very beginning. Tablets that had previously been considered too damaged to translate were yielding legible content for the first time. Gaps in well-known texts were being filled in with a level of accuracy that surprised even experienced cuneiform scholars. And perhaps most significantly, the AI was doing something that no previous method had been able to do consistently. It was comparing texts across different collections, from different sites, different time periods, and different dialects, and finding patterns that connected them. Some of those patterns were expected. Historians already knew that certain religious themes appeared repeatedly across Mesopotamian writing. The stories of creation, flood, and divine kingship had been documented across multiple sources for years. But other patterns were not expected at all. There were recurring phrases that appeared in tablets separated by hundreds of miles and centuries of time, phrases that did not fit neatly into the framework of religious myth or royal record. There were sequences of text that read less like storytelling and more like documentation, structured, repetitive, and oddly specific. Researchers began to take a closer look, and the closer they looked, the more the familiar framework of ancient mythology started to feel insufficient as an explanation for what was written on these tablets. The texts were not simply telling stories about gods and humans in the way that historians had long assumed. There was something else embedded in the language, a consistency of detail, a pattern of purpose that had never been visible when the tablets were studied one by one. What exactly those patterns contained and why they have shifted the way some researchers now interpret the origins of early human civilization is a question that requires a careful look at the texts themselves. Because once you see what the AI pulled together from 4,000 years of silence, the old explanations start to feel a great deal less certain. When the AI-assisted translations began producing coherent results at scale, the first thing researchers noticed was that the creation narratives inside these tablets were not as simple as previously thought. For over a century, the standard interpretation had been that Sumerian creation myths described a single act, gods forming humanity from clay and setting them to work. That reading was broadly accepted, taught in universities, and repeated in popular books about ancient history. But the fuller picture that emerged from cross-referencing hundreds of tablets told a considerably more complicated story. The texts do not describe one creation event, they describe multiple. There are references to earlier versions of human beings, to groups that were made, tested, and in some cases discarded. Scholars had seen fragments of this idea before, but without the ability to compare texts at scale, the full pattern had never been visible. Once the AI assembled the relevant passages side by side, a structure began to emerge that was difficult to explain away as simple mythology. The tablets appeared to be describing a process, one with stages, failures, and deliberate revisions. One of the most discussed discoveries involved the specific terminology the tablets used to refer to early human beings. Cuneiform scholars had long been familiar with the word Lulu, a Sumerian term loosely translated as man or human being. But the AI flagged a second term that appeared in a distinct set of passages, Sag-Gig, which translates roughly as the black-headed people. This phrase had been noted by researchers before, but it had generally been set aside as an ethnic or geographic descriptor with no deeper significance. In the broader context that the AI reconstruction provided, however, the term appeared in passages that described a group specifically associated with labor, physical endurance, and a particular absence of questioning behavior. One passage, according to researchers who have reviewed the translations, described this group as having eyes that do not question, a phrase that reads very differently from the kind of poetic language typically found in religious hymns. The AI also identified several recurring phrases scattered across different tablets that had previously been treated as isolated poetic expressions. One translates roughly as function-bearing life. Another refers to those who do not multiply. A third phrase, described by some researchers as the one that gave them genuine pause, is clay of lower glow. Taken individually, these phrases could easily be dismissed as metaphors. But when the AI placed them in their reconstructed context and compared their usage across multiple sources, a different interpretation became harder to ignore. Some researchers now read these lines as describing human beings who were deliberately created without the ability to reproduce, essentially a workforce that was designed to be finite, controllable, and entirely dependent on the gods for its continuation. If that reading is accurate, it would mean that the earliest humans described in these texts were not meant to be a permanent species. They were a temporary solution to a specific problem, shaped for a purpose and built with a natural endpoint. The tablets also describe the gods evaluating these early groups, assessing their performance, and in some cases removing them entirely. One passage describes a group referred to as the clay of restless voice, beings who refused to follow instruction and were, according to the text, cast into the rivers. Another describes a group whose physical form was considered inadequate for the work assigned to them, sent back into the mountain and forgotten. These are not the kinds of details that fit comfortably within the framework of religious allegory. They read more like records. At some point in the narrative, the tablets describe a shift. The existing system was not working well enough. The humans being produced required constant effort to maintain. They could not reproduce, which meant every new worker had to be created individually. The process was slow, and according to some passages, the demand for labor was outpacing the supply. A decision was made to revise the design. The figure responsible for that revision, according to the Sumerian texts, was Enki, a deity described across many tablets as the god of wisdom, fresh water, and craftsmanship. Enki appears throughout Sumerian literature as a complex figure, creative, sometimes subversive, and consistently associated with knowledge and ingenuity. In this context, the tablets describe him as making a significant modification to the human model, adding something that the previous versions had lacked and that his fellow gods, particularly his brother Enlil, did not entirely welcome. The result of that modification was described in the tablets as a new kind of human being. His name was Adapa. Unlike the earlier versions, Adapa was not described purely in terms of physical labor or task fulfillment. The texts describe him as chief among men, a being capable of speech, reasoning, and understanding. He could grasp the intentions of the gods, communicate with them directly, and exercise a degree of independent thought. He was also crucially capable of reproduction, which meant that his traits could be passed on. For the first time in these narratives, humanity had the potential to continue without direct divine intervention. But Adapa's story contains a detail that researchers have found particularly significant. The texts describe him being summoned before Anu, the sky god and ruler of the divine hierarchy. Anu offered him the food and water of eternal life. Before Adapa arrived, however, Enki had warned him not to eat or drink anything he was offered. Adapa obeyed that warning and refused Anu's offer, and in doing so, according to the tablets, he gave up the chance at immortality for himself and for all humans who came after him. Whether Enki's warning was a deliberate act of sabotage or a genuine precaution is something the texts do not resolve. But the outcome is stated plainly. Humanity would live, grow, and reproduce, but it would also age and die. The decision made in that moment, whether by design or deception, shaped the fundamental condition of human existence as the Sumerians understood it. What followed from Adapa's creation was, according to the tablets, a division. Not every line of humanity received the same modification. Some groups remained as they were before, fixed to labor, without the capacity for learning or leadership that Adapa represented. Others, descended from or modeled after Adapa, were granted greater autonomy. They could adapt, reason, and eventually govern. The tablets describe these two tracks running parallel to each other, and the gap between them was not incidental. It was built into the system from the start. This division became the source of a significant conflict at the divine level. The tablets describe a sustained disagreement between Enki and Enlil about what humanity should be allowed to become. Enki, who had created Adapa and given humans the capacity for reproduction and independent thought, appears in many passages as broadly sympathetic to human development. Enlil, by contrast, is consistently described as suspicious of human potential and deeply resistant to any expansion of human capability. He is portrayed in the text as a figure of rigid authority, committed to maintaining a strict order in which humans remain subservient and contained. As the human population grew and as certain groups began to develop skills in writing, astronomy, agriculture, and metalwork, Enlil's opposition intensified. The tablets describe him viewing these developments not as progress, but as a threat to divine order. His response, according to the texts, was severe. The passages that describe what followed are among the most widely recognized in ancient literature, a catastrophic flood intended not to cleanse the earth, but to eliminate humanity entirely and begin again from nothing. Enki once again intervened. He warned a single man, referred to in different versions of the text as Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, or in later traditions as Noah, and instructed him to build a vessel capable of surviving the flood. The man obeyed, and a portion of humanity survived. The flood narrative itself is well documented across multiple ancient cultures, but the Sumerian version, as reconstructed through AI-assisted translation, frames it explicitly as an act of deliberate genocide that was only partially prevented by one god's decision to defy another. Beyond the creation and flood narratives, the AI translations flagged a separate category of text that researchers found even harder to explain. Scattered across various tablets tucked between genealogies and religious hymns were passages that described objects and phenomena in unusually technical language. Vehicles described as having wings of metal and wood, propelled not by wind, but by fire from within. Descriptions of a concentrated light that could destroy physical matter. References to metals processed through specific combinations of heat in ways that suggest knowledge of metallurgy well beyond what archaeologists had previously attributed to early Mesopotamian civilization. Mainstream scholars have generally interpreted these passages as metaphor, poetic ways of describing storms, volcanic events, or the power of the gods. But when the AI compared these passages across different tablets and identified the repeated use of specific technical components, some researchers began to argue that metaphor was no longer a fully satisfying explanation. The descriptions were too consistent, too specific, and too widely distributed across unconnected sources to be coincidental. What the tablets also made clear was that this knowledge, whatever its true nature, was not shared equally. Certain groups were given access to these tools and techniques. Others were deliberately excluded, kept away not only from advanced knowledge, but in some cases from basic literacy altogether. The structure that the tablets describe is one in which information itself was a form of control, distributed selectively to maintain a hierarchy that had been established from the very beginning of human existence. Among everything that the AI-assisted translations uncovered, there is one thread that researchers have found particularly difficult to set aside. It does not concern the creation of humanity, or the conflict between divine figures, or even the descriptions of advanced technology that appear scattered through the tablets. It concerns something that the Sumerians appear to have been doing consistently, methodically, and over an extraordinarily long period of time. They were watching the sky. And they were keeping records of what they saw in a way that suggests they were not simply observing out of curiosity. They were tracking something specific, and they believed that what they were tracking would eventually return. The astronomical records preserved in Sumerian and later Babylonian tablets are already well known to historians of science. For roughly 7 centuries, priests stationed in cities across Mesopotamia recorded eclipses, planetary movements, and the positions of stars with a regularity and precision that has impressed modern astronomers. They did this without telescopes, without advanced mathematical notation as we understand it today, and without the kind of institutional scientific infrastructure that we associate with that level of sustained observation. What they had instead was a belief that the sky was not decorative, it was communicative. The movements of celestial bodies were, in their understanding, a form of language, and reading that language correctly was a matter of survival. Within those astronomical records, one name appears repeatedly across a wide range of sources. That name is Nibiru. The word itself has been translated in various ways, most commonly as crossing or point of transition, though some scholars have also rendered it as the planet of the crossing, or simply the ferry. Its exact meaning has been debated for decades, and its identity as a celestial object has been the subject of significant disagreement among researchers. Some have argued it refers to Jupiter. Others have suggested it describes a specific point in the sky where planetary paths intersect. A smaller number of researchers have long maintained that Nibiru describes an as-yet unidentified body following an extremely elongated orbit that brings it into the inner solar system only at very long intervals. What the AI translations added to this debate was not a definitive answer about what Nibiru physically is. What they added was context. When the relevant passages were reconstructed and compared across multiple sources, researchers found that references to Nibiru were consistently embedded within a larger framework of cyclical thinking. The Sumerians did not appear to view time as a straight line moving from past to future. They viewed it as a series of repeating cycles, each one ending in a period of upheaval and each one beginning again from a reduced starting point. Nibiru, in this framework, was not simply a celestial curiosity. It was a marker, a signal that a cycle was ending and that what came next would be severe. The tablets describe Nibiru's return in terms that are notably consistent across different sources. It is called the Destroyer in some passages. In others, it is referred to as the One who veils the light. Descriptions of what follows its appearance include references to catastrophic flooding, seismic events, and the collapse of established civilizations. Historians have long interpreted these descriptions as mythological explanations for natural disasters, the kind of storytelling that ancient cultures used to make sense of floods and earthquakes. But when the AI placed these passages alongside the broader body of text that described human origins, divine conflict, and deliberate societal structuring, some researchers began to argue that the context changed the meaning significantly. According to these translations, the return of Nibiru was not simply a natural disaster to be endured. It was described as a reset, a moment in which the existing order was dismantled and rebuilt. Every time this cycle completed, the tablets suggest the accumulated knowledge of the previous era was largely lost. Civilizations collapsed, populations were reduced. What had been built was buried and the survivors began again with fragments. And crucially, the tablets suggest that this was not entirely accidental. The idea that some groups were designed to survive these resets while others were not appears repeatedly in the text, echoing the same divisions that were described at the moment of human creation. The groups described as being under Enki's protection appear in these later passages as those designated to carry knowledge forward through periods of collapse. The tablets refer to them as watchers or guardians, people who lived at the edges of their societies and whose primary function was preservation. They held onto information not in public records or official archives, but in coded stories, oral traditions, and fragments of text that could survive even if the civilizations around them did not. The knowledge was deliberately scattered, broken into pieces that would only make full sense when reassembled. And the reassembly, the tablets appear to suggest, was not something that any single generation was expected to accomplish. It was a project measured in thousands of years. This is where the AI translations produce what is perhaps their most unsettling implication. The tablets describe a body of knowledge that was intentionally fragmented and hidden, designed to wait for a moment when it could finally be reconstructed in full. For most of recorded history, that reconstruction was impossible. The tablets themselves were buried. The writing system that contained them was forgotten for centuries after the fall of Mesopotamian civilization, only rediscovered and slowly decoded from the 19th century onwards. Even then, the sheer volume of material and the difficulty of the language meant that no complete picture was achievable through human scholarship alone. The tool that finally made that reconstruction possible was artificial intelligence, a technology that did not exist until the 21st century, a technology that was, by any reasonable measure, utterly unimaginable to the people who wrote these tablets. And yet, the structure of what those tablets contain, the deliberate fragmentation, the distribution across different sites and time periods, the patterns that only become visible when everything is compared simultaneously, fits with striking precision the conditions that AI translation actually required to work. You need a very large dataset. You need material from multiple sources. You need the ability to cross-reference at scale. The tablets, as they have come down to us, provide exactly that. Whether that is coincidence or something more intentional is a question that researchers approach with considerable caution. The more careful scholars working in this area are reluctant to draw firm conclusions from what is still a body of work in progress. Machine learning models applied to ancient languages are powerful, but they are not infallible. They can identify patterns, but interpreting those patterns still requires human judgment, and human judgment is always shaped by existing assumptions and biases. The risk of finding what you are looking for, of reading significance into coincidence, is real and widely acknowledged in the field. At the same time, the patterns that the AI has identified across these tablets are not easily dismissed. The taxonomy of human groups described in dozens of surviving fragments, each group assigns specific traits, specific roles, and specific limitations, is too consistent across too many independent sources to be explained away as random variation in a mythological tradition. The clay of strength, associated in multiple passages with physical labor and explicitly excluded from language use. The blood of brightness, appearing in priestly and scholarly contexts with consistent links to writing and astronomical observation. The shadow-formed ones described as keepers of animals and barred from entering sacred spaces. These classifications repeat across tablets found in different cities, written in different periods by scribes who had no documented contact with one another. The physical descriptions embedded in some of these passages add another layer that researchers have found difficult to ignore. References to those from the scorched horizon, to pale dwelling ones born of stone and wind, to red soil walkers hardened in the land without water, appear in the same tablets that describe assigned roles and deliberate limitations. The AI's cross-referencing shows a consistent overlap between these physical descriptors and the functions each group was assigned. Scholars who have reviewed these findings are careful to note that the tablets do not use anything resembling modern racial categories. But the structure they describe, a system in which physical characteristics were linked to social function and enforced through deliberate restriction, is recognizable in its basic logic, even if its ancient framing is entirely different from anything in the modern world. What the tablets collectively describe, when read as a complete record rather than a set of isolated fragments, is a civilization that understood itself as the product of design, not the result of natural development or gradual cultural evolution, but the outcome of deliberate decisions made at the very beginning of human existence by beings who assigned roles, distributed knowledge selectively, and structured society from the top down with specific ends in mind. Whether those beings were gods in any theological sense, advanced humans, or something else entirely is a question the tablets do not answer directly. What they do answer, with a consistency that the AI has now made visible for the first time, is that the divisions running through human society are not accidents of history. According to these records, they were features they were built in. That is the record that 4,000 years of buried clay has finally produced. Not a myth, not a story, and not a simple religious text. A structured account of how humanity was shaped, separated, and in some cases silenced, written by people who believed they were preserving something important enough to encode across centuries and scatter across thousands of miles of ancient landscape. They could not have known what technology would eventually be needed to read it, but they left enough behind that when that technology finally arrived, the message was still there, waiting to be put back together.